Clifford Goldstein was born in Albany, New York, and was raised as a secular Jew before converting to the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1980. He has a passion for writing and studying and is a lover of philosophy. Cliff has been the Sabbath School Quarterly editor since 1999 and has authored more than 25 books in his career. Additionally, he has written hundreds of articles in various publications, both within and outside the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He has hosted several television programs, including Cliff on the Hope Channel, and is a scriptwriter for various radio and television programs both in the United States and overseas. Please welcome Clifford Goldstein.
Video said I was raised in a Jewish home, a very secular Jewish home, and I used to joke about the way we kept the holidays. You could catch it. They try to kill us, they failed, let's eat. Okay. And that was the essence of my religious upbringing. And yeah, that was about it. And even though I was raised, because I was raised secular, I was also raised very postmodern, very relativistic. You have your truth. That's your truth. You have yours. That's your truth. And even though logic would tell you they contradict each other, they both can't be true, it didn't matter. It was your truth. And there was no overarching Archimedean point or God's viewpoint to know what truth is. Truth was personal, cultural, relative, period. And that was how I was raised. That's how I was educated. And that's how I really fervently believed. I mean, passionately. And I can remember it was the mid-1970s. And I was a student at the University of Florida at Gainesville. And I was sitting in this pizza parlor, and I was eating a pizza, and I'd say drinking a non-Adventist beverage, and I was reading a philosopher. And in that moment, he said something that changed my life. And you know, it was funny. I remembered the book that I was reading. And I've been telling this story for 40 years, and just a while back online, I bought the book. I mean, not the exact copy I had, obviously, but I got a copy of the book, and I read the lines that had just changed, just about a couple months ago, that had changed my life. And the essence of what the guy said was, in order to live the most perfect life upon the earth, you need to find out the reason why you were here and live your life accordingly. And for some reason, I don't know why, for some reason those words went in my mind like a lobotomy and just went in and instantly wiped out all that postmodernism, all that relativism. And look, I explain it like this. There was the pizza sitting on the table in front of me. Okay? The pizza was there. Now, you could have 10,000 different people with 10,000 views on the pizza, how the pizza got there, the meaning of the pizza, the purpose, the truth. Maybe somebody believed aliens dropped the pizza out of the sky, and that's how it got there. Maybe the god Marduk created the pizza. Maybe it evolved. I mean, you could have 10,000 people, 10,000 views about the pizza. People could start religions based on their view of the pizza, die for their belief in the pizza, or kill for it. Whatever it was, you could have all these views, and every last one of them could be wrong. Maybe nobody could ever know the truth, the origin of the pizza. In one sense, that was totally irrelevant. The fact was, there was this pizza sitting on the table. Somewhere out there in the universe, somewhere, whether any human being could ever know what it was, there was an explanation for the origins and the truth of the pizza, even if nobody could ever know what it was. And that moment just hit me. Hey, I'm here. There's a world. There's a universe. There's something here. Maybe we're all an illusion. Maybe we're all brains in vats. Fine, and that was the truth. But the fact is, there's something here, the universe. Something had to explain it. In the same way, something had to explain the pizza. And whatever that was, that explained the origin of the universe, that explained whatever it was, that was the truth. In other words, truth with a capital T existed. And it was like, whoa, it hit me. Truth had to exist. Now, again, that's a total separate issue from whether I or anyone could know it. Okay, at that point, it was like, that's a total separate, but just the realization that, wow, truth has to exist. And I mean, I remember I was flabbergasted. And I'll never forget, I walked out of that pizza parlor. It was in I guess it was like 1976. And I was walking through the streets of Gainesville, Florida, walking home at night. And, I don't want to use the word sacred because that implies something religious. But when it hit me that truth had to exist, I remember I felt it so strong I felt the pain in my chest. Because I remember thinking, if it were humanly possible, because at this point there's no question, the truth had to exist. Something's here, something had to explain it. But that was a totally separate issue. Again, from whether I or anyone could know it. Two completely different things. I might have any idea what it was, I might not ever know. But I knew I couldn't be wrong. That something had to explain whatever it is here. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm walking through and I'm thinking, if it were humanly possible, because I knew it had to exist, I thought, if I could know this truth, whatever it was, I thought, I didn't care where it led me, what it cost me, what I had to suffer, what I had to give up. Because that was a big if, but if I could know what the truth was, I wanted to know it no matter what. And all I know is about 3 years later, I got in all sorts of nonsense over the years. The Mormons I hung out with, and gurus, and went through my Marxist thing for a while. But of all the different ways I could have gone, all the different paths, I ended up becoming a Seventh-day Adventist. Now, that's remarkable, because growing up, I knew one Seventh-day Adventist. And this is terrible, but I guess I should. We used to smoke pot together. The only Adventist I knew, we would get stoned. And we would get high, and he would witness to me. And this actually has a happy ending. Believe it, about 25 years later, we were sitting together at the General Conference eating in the General Conference. But that had a happy ending. But at that point, poor kid. But anyway, that was the only Adventist. And for me to become an Adventist too was remarkable, because there were two kinds of people in my life I used to hate. I used to hate Christians. And I'm serious too. I used to hate vegetarians. I mean, I was so carnivorous. I was so into eating meat that when I remember mocking, when I would meet vegetarians, I remember mocking them, okay? Now, my animosity, though, to Christianity was a little more deeper seated than my animosity towards vegetarians, because, even though I was raised in a secular Jewish home, I was raised Jewish, and I knew I was Jewish. And for secular Jews, like, our religion is the Holocaust. I could have named you every Nazi concentration camp in Europe and how many Jews the Germans butchered there, but I couldn't tell you what book of the Bible the Ten Commandments were in. Okay, and all this, and then all history of the Christian church persecuting the Jews. The Holocaust was just the culmination. The yellow stars, the Nazis, they got that from the Catholics. The Catholics made the Jews wear their yellow stars and stick them in ghettos. So I was aware of all this history, and I was bitter against Christianity because of it. And at the University of Florida, there used to be this itinerant preacher. His name is Jed Smock. And Jed would come to the campus at the University of Florida, and he'd just stand out there with his Bible in his hand and just preach hell, fire, and brimstone. And there'd be a crowd of students would get around him in a circle, and and he'd be preaching to them. And I was never content to stand with the students. I'd get in the center of the circle, and I'd be in that guy's face. And I'd curse him, I'd curse his mother, I'd curse his Bible. He swore there was no hope for me. And he was a charismatic. And he used to put his hands on me and speak in tongues, to cast demons out of me. You good Adventists probably never saw The Exorcist, right? So you don't know about that. But I would drool and I would writhe like the demons. Eventually my friends nicknamed me Heckle. That was my nickname because I was out there haranguing this guy all the time. And somebody even told me a couple of good old boys didn't appreciate this Jew out there blaspheming the preacher. Somebody warned me, you better be careful, about that. But anyway, I didn't care. Anyway, this went on for a couple of years until I graduated the University of Florida in Gainesville. And at that time of my life, I had one goal and one goal alone. I was going to be a novelist, or I was going to be nothing. And I had started a novel my senior year at college. And the book consumed me. Nothing else mattered but my novel. I poured everything into this. I was a creative writing student and had studied this, but my life got poured into this book. All that mattered to me was my art. And I just got college done, out of the way. I wanted to get it out of the way, but all I wanted to do was write. Well, I had worked on the novel a year, and then I graduated University of Florida, and I went back home to Miami Beach. I grew up in Miami Beach. And I went back to Miami Beach, and then I was there a little while, and I decided I want to go over to Europe to work on my novel in Europe, because part of the novel took place in Europe. And I had been to Europe before. When I graduated high school, I had saved my money and wandered through Europe. I had lived over there a couple of years later. I had lived in Europe and worked over there, and had just wanted to go back and work on the novel in Europe. So I have a little bit of money left over, and I'm over in England, and I'm just hitchhiking around England trying to find somewhere to go. And at one point, I actually found myself on an island with a Catholic monastery off the coast of Wales. And I was there for a couple days, and then the monks kicked me off the island. Okay, I'm not going to get into all that. But anyway, I got kicked off the island, and I'm hitchhiking around England, and I'm not getting anywhere. And I thought, I'm going to go to Sweden, because I had lived in Sweden a couple years earlier. I could speak the language. I was fairly fluent in the language. And I thought, I'm going to go back to Sweden. So I hitchhike to the British coast, and then I take a boat from England to Holland. And then when I get off the boat, I'm going to just hitchhike north to Sweden. So the whole time I'm hitching in England, it's raining on me. And you get to Holland, it rains more in the Netherlands than it rains in England. And I'm walking down the gangplank, and it's cold and it's rainy. And there's a guy walking ahead of me who's got a backpack. And on the back of his backpack, he's got a sign that says Greece. Greece, beaches, sun, And I'm hitching to Sweden? So I walk up to the guy. I walk right up to him and say, "Hey man, are you hitching to Greece?" And he says, "Yeah." And I go, "Oh, what a coincidence, so am I. Let's hitchhike together." And just like that, I changed my mind. However, two guys in the rain with backpacks, we're not getting anywhere. And so we just split up, and we just go on our own. And it takes me 4 long, hard, hot days. I practically walked through communist Yugoslavia. And I wound up in Athens, Greece. And I had a friend who I knew at school lived in Athens, and he gave me his address. He says, "Come to, I can find you a job or something." So 4 hot days on the road, I'm just burned out. And I got this address in the city, and I got to take a bus here. And I finally get to the address in the city, and I knock on the door, and this little old lady comes out. And I say, "Faunus, is Faunus here?" And she says, "Oh, Faunus not here. Faunus lives in Miami." And I let out a wail, and I guess she feels sorry for me. So she brings me in, she feeds me a meal, and an hour later, I'm back out in the streets of Athens. I have no idea where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do. And my immediate concern is, where am I going to sleep? And I found some bushes along a wall. And I just laid my sleeping bag out in the bushes. And I went to sleep. And that night I had a dream. And I was dreaming I was sleeping in the bushes. And then I dreamt that I woke up and flew to Israel to live on a kibbutz in Israel and write my novel in Israel. Now, kibbutz, for lack of a better term, think of a self-supporting institution, or think of communes. It's a very poor way to do it, but self-contained entities, and they were part of the pioneers in Israel. And they would take volunteers, and you could go there and work, okay? That was my dream. Well, when I woke up, and again, too, for me, dreams for me were, I was totally secular. What you dreamt, it depended on what you ate for dinner that night, whether your mother breastfed you enough as a baby. I had there was nothing, I was a totally secular, naturalistic guy. So I didn't believe any of that stuff. But when I woke up, I thought about the dream, and I thought, whoa, that's really not a bad idea. And right across the street, and I don't know why I remember this detail, But there was a travel agency right across from where I was sleeping, and it opened at 9 o'clock. And I went to that travel agency, booked a ticket, flew to Israel, and was on a kibbutz in Israel working on my novel just as I had dreamt in those bushes a couple days before. So I get to this kibbutz. Again, it's like this was an agricultural kibbutz, and they grew grapefruits and avocados, and they had a guitar factory in another part of town, and I got to the kibbutz, and I loved it. I worked 30 hours a week. It was up in the Galilee, right on the edge of the Golan Heights. It's beautiful. I worked 30 hours a week, and the rest of the time was mine to work on my book, because that was my life, my novel. So I'm on the kibbutz. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of details, and you've got to remember these details because they come back in importance later. When I was on the kibbutz, I was into poetry. I still read poetry all the time. But there was a book of poetry by a woman named Sylvia Plath. And nothing I had read that year had impacted me more than this book. This was my book. When I told the story to people later on the kibbutz, I said, remember, I used to make you, whether you wanted to or not, sit there and listen to me read you these women's poems. That's how much the stuff impacted me. And it was kind of heavy, too, because she writes a poem, she gives her kids cookies and milk, puts them in a room, stuffs towel under the door, and sticks her head in an oven and gasses herself. Okay, kind of heavy stuff. But anyway, this Sylvia Plath, this stuff had impacted me more than anything else. So remember Sylvia. And also, when I was on the kibbutz, I had a blonde Danish girlfriend. Her name was Tina. Okay, so remember Sylvia Plath and remember Tina. Anyway, back to kibbutz, other things. I'm on the kibbutz, I'm working on my novel, and after a while, who should show up but a group of 12 fundamentalist Christians from America. They're these evangelicals, they're very much into Israel and prophecy and the Jews fulfilling, dispensationalism, and 200 million man Chinese army is going to come down and invade Israel in the Battle of Armageddon, but the church is going to be raptured, and 144,000 Jewish virgins, 12,000 from each tribe of Israel, going to preach the gospel. This kind of stuff that we as Adventists, we don't buy into any of that. Okay, thank goodness. But these people were very serious, and they were there to be a witness, silent witness to the Jews in Israel, because it was central to their eschatology. Well, I was furious. Here I am, I'm in the boonies of the first Jewish state since the Bar Kokhba rebellion in like AD 134, and now all these Christians are here. And I said, well, I got Israel to get away from these people. And so so I started haranguing them. I had years of experience. I started haranguing them, and it got so out of hand that eventually the Jews on the kibbutz, they said, if you don't leave these people alone and stop this, we're going to kick you off the kibbutz. Okay, well, the monks had already kicked me out of the monastery. I did not want to get kicked off the kibbutz. So I just backed off and left the people alone, left them alone. And over time, I got to know them more, and they were all right, and they really weren't all anti-Semites like I thought. If anything, I could tell, no matter how much what I did to them, they never stopped loving me. And I found that kind of hard to argue with. But for the most part, I didn't care. All I wanted to do was work on my novel. And a year goes by, working on the novel, and I decide I'm going to go back to Europe to work on my novel. I put over 2 years of my life in the book. In many ways, the novel controlled my life more than I controlled the lives of the characters in it. I mean, my whole life was centered around writing this book. It was I poured everything into it. Nothing else mattered. So I end up leaving Israel, and I hitchhike up to Europe, and I end up going up to Denmark. And in the middle of the city of Copenhagen, there had been this vast military barracks. And the military had abandoned it years earlier, and it was all these hippies, these squatters, kind of moved into this area, and it was like a little community within a community. And just, it was just like this subculture there. And I had been there before, and I remembered it a certain way, and I get there, and the place was really just kind of a big slum. I think half the drug addicts in Europe were there, half the fugitives. It was really kind of a skanky place. I didn't realize it at the time. And, I get there, and anyway, it was kind of disappointing there, but I'm hanging out there, and I think part of my novel's going to take place there. Well, I'm there a couple days, and I'm walking through this courtyard. It was a courtyard in front of this famous church. There's this famous green church that's got this beautiful, stairway. I mean, it was a well-known church, but I'm walking through the courtyard, and I hear some woman screaming. And I look over, and some guy is beating on this woman. She's on the ground, and he's kicking her and stomping her. And I'm walking by, and I'm thinking, I don't want to get involved in this. And I try to walk by, but I just can't. I have to do something. So I walk over. As soon as I walk over, the guy stops beating on her, and she gets up and runs away. I thought, I did my good deed for the day. So I start to walk away, and this guy who was beating on her, some strung out little junkie, I'm sure. I start to walk away, and the next thing I know, this guy just turns around when I'm not looking and punches me right in the mouth. Well, I'm not all that big, I'm not all that, whatever. But when I was in college, I used to box. I boxed on a bag all the time. I went into a ring one time, and I went back to the bag because the bag never hit me back. Okay? I got into a ring one time, got my head handed to me, and said, forget it. So I went back to the bag. Well, the guy punches me, and it was just reflexes. I mean, I just turned around and boom, 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 1, 2, 3, flat out laid him out. I mean, it was nothing, Well, when he punched me, though, he hit me, and my glasses went flying. I mean, my eyes are so bad, they won't even do LASIK on me. They say, we can't help you. I mean, they can help me, but they don't want to do it because they're never going to get me 20/20. And they want their statistics, to be, but whatever. My eyes are really bad, and he knocks my glasses off. And I can't find my glasses. So I reach over, and I grab this guy by his head and his hair, and I go, find my glasses, find my glasses. So I get my glasses, I put my glasses on, and I say to this guy, look, man, go get marriage counseling or something, whatever. You obviously got some family issues here, whatever. And then I take him, and I just throw him on the ground. Well, unfortunately, the moment I threw him on the ground, I have a weak knee and a weak back. And somehow, the moment I threw him on the ground, both of them gave out on me. And the sharp pain in my knee, the sharp pain in my back which was bad enough, but the guy gets up and he pulls out a knife and says, I'm going to kill you, man. Well, boxing or no boxing, somebody pulls a knife on you, what do? You run, of course. If you had a gun, you could finish, you could take care of it, but wasn't packing. So I'm running. I'm running down the street. It's like my knee and my back didn't need that. And I'm telling you, it's like out of Keystone Cops. He's chasing me saying, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you. And I'm literally yelling, help, help. And then amazingly enough, the police come. And they take us down to the station. And like an hour later, the cop comes in, he says, well, I'm sorry, but according to Danish law, the knife isn't long enough to make an arrest. We got to let him go. Okay, it was long enough to put in my back, but anyway. So the bottom line is I'm back out in the streets. I'm back out in this place. My knee hurts, my back hurts. I got a swollen lip from where he punches me. He punched me, and I'm looking over my shoulder, really paranoid about this guy, okay? Now, the reason I'm telling the story is I'm trying to make the point, things were not going particularly well for me at this point, okay? Things were not. Then to top it all off, I had a friend that lived in another part of town that I had met a couple years ago under such strange circumstances. You're going to have a hard enough time believing the story I tell you tonight. I don't even bother trying to convince people of this other story. But this guy was in another part of town, and a nice part of town, and he was really deep into the occult and deep into spiritualism. And I would go to this guy's apartment, and it was just creepy in there. And this guy used to get into these drunken stupors, and he'd sit in a chair for days, and he'd stomp the ground, he'd stomp, and he'd shriek, and he'd let out these shrieks and do it for hours. He would never get up. He'd sit there. He would go to the bathroom on himself, sitting there, just shrieking and howling. And it was, and I don't know what. And I finally, at one point, I'm looking at this guy. I've never seen anything like it. And to me, of all people, I finally thought, this guy's so messed up, he needs anything. And so I look at him and I say, hey man, have you ever thought about Jesus? And the moment, for me, I don't know where that came from. And the moment, though, I said the name Jesus, I'll never forget, he stopped his stomping and he looks up at me with one eye. Okay, don't ask me what the one eye thing is. He looks up at me with one eye and he says to me, 20 years ago I asked for Jesus. Instead, I got the devil. That's his exact words. Well, at that point, folks, Jesus, Buddha, Moses, the good tooth fairy, it's all the same to me. Okay, I didn't believe in any of that. But when he said that so freaked me out, I said, I'm out of here. And I said, I'm just leaving Denmark. Okay, I had traveled enough to know you can't get away from yourself by travel. But I said, I got to get out of here. So I leave there, and I go to Paris. And I'm in Paris, and my knees hurt and my back's hurt, and I got my own issues I'm dealing with. And for some reason, too, I had been on the road a lot alone since I was 17 years old. I would much prefer traveling by myself. And yet, for some reason, I'm in Paris, and I'm just lonely, and I got just on and on and on. And my life is just spiraling down. And it was the only time in my life where I said, okay, Cliff, you could do A, or you could do B, or you could kill yourself. And I still remember, I was in Paris a couple years ago with my wife, and I said, she knows the story, and I said, I believe I was standing right here when all this happened because I saw the Eiffel Tower. And I remember thinking I could just jump off the Eiffel Tower. And as soon as I had that thought, it was like, boop, this other thought kind of came in and knocked the thought of suicide out. And the thought was, hang on, because maybe this Jesus stuff is true. But the moment I had that thought, I can remember this so clearly. I remember I just cursed myself. I said, look at you. Your whole life, you always viewed religious people as weak people. Oh, they couldn't handle the hard knocks of life, so they have their little invisible bunny, and they say their prayers to her, their idols or their altars, and they sing and they pray and they make themselves feel better. And my whole life it was bleh. I mean, I thought it was such a cheap, weak crutch. And I'm thinking, and now for the first time in your miserable 23 years of life, you feel like you can't handle it, and you're going to reach out to some God or something to make you feel better? And I said, no way. I wasn't going to do it. I was too honest, a seeker for truth, to reach out and believe a lie, no matter how good the lie made me feel. In other words, I wasn't going to do it. I would rather have jumped off that Eiffel Tower and been squashed dead like a grape rather than live a lie, no matter how good the lie made me feel. I wasn't going to do it. And I can remember the moment I stopped. Whether I shook a fist up in the sky, I don't know, but I stopped and I remember saying, okay, God, if you're there, if you exist, I need a sign. And little did I know that the Bible says Greeks seek for wisdom, Jews seek for signs. I did not know that till years later. It's amazing if you think about it. And I said, God, if you're there, if you exist, I need a sign. Otherwise, I will never believe ever. And with that, I left. And I went back to Israel. And I went back to my old kibbutz because I wanted just to get back and work on my novel. I wasn't getting that much work done in Europe. And I go back to my old kibbutz, but they won't let me back on the kibbutz. Okay, they won't let me back. But I saw the Christians whom I harangued, and I told them what happened in Paris. And one of them said, well, if you ask God for God, he'll reveal himself to you. Or, all right, fine, let him. Until then, I was just going on my merry way. So I want to go back to a kibbutz and work on my novel. And so I went to the main kibbutz office in Tel Aviv. You don't just walk on the door of a kibbutz and knock on it and say, I'm here. You go to a main office and they'll assign you where you're needed and so on. So I go to the main kibbutz office there in Tel Aviv, and I walk in the office, and there's a woman at the desk, and there's a guy sitting in a seat ahead of me, and I'm sitting here, and I'm waiting my turn. And I look over on the desk, and I see a sheet of paper on the woman's desk. And it has my name, Clifford Goldstein, on the paper. And I interrupted her with the boy, and I said, excuse me, how did you know I was coming? And he goes, who are you? And I point to the paper and say, Clifford Goldstein. Well, the boy who was sitting there, he jumps up and says, no, that's my paper. My name is Clifford Goldstein. All right, Clifford Goldstein's not the most common name in the world. But again, look where I was. Okay, look where I was. And I said, Cliff, where are you from? And he said, Miami Beach. And when I told my mother the story later, she said, we had shared the same pediatrician because 10 years earlier, 15 years, his bills used to come to my house for the pediatrician. Well, he was there to get assigned to a kibbutz. And I said, Cliff, have I got the kibbutz for you? You go to this kibbutz, just tell him your name is Clifford Goldstein and you're from Miami Beach and watch, okay? So he goes to the kibbutz. Well, I end up going to another kibbutz and I'm not getting my act together. And I decide I'm going to come back to the States. But before I come back, I go to the old kibbutz just to say goodbye to everyone. And of all the different rooms on the kibbutz where they had put volunteers, Clifford Goldstein was in the same room that I had been in months earlier. And not only was he in the same room, there were 2 beds in the room, and he was sleeping in the same bed that I had been sleeping in. So I'm sitting there, he's laying on the bed, he's sitting in a chair at the front of the bed, and I'm sitting in a chair at the end, and we're kind of laughing at this. It is a little creepy, but we're, whatever. And we're talking, and I looked up on the bookshelf over the bed, which was just a board in the wall. And when I left Israel to go to Denmark, I just left all my books on the bookshelf. And so I'm looking on the bookshelf up there, and I see a bunch of my old books on the shelf. And I said, Cliff, do you like my books? And he says, what are you talking about? I said, what do you mean you like my books? I left them there. And he says, no. He says, those are all my books. And I reach up, and I said, no way. And I reach up for the volume of poetry by Sylvia Plath, which was sitting right there. And I open it up and I look. It was not my book. It was his book. And I said, what kind of dork reads this stuff? And I looked at him and I said, Cliff, are you a writer? And he says, well, I'm thinking of becoming a writer and I come to Israel to write. Okay? Then we're sitting there, we're talking. And this girl walks into the room. I've never seen her before. It's his girlfriend. She's blonde. She's from Denmark. And her name is Tina. Okay? Now, what does one do with this? And I remember, and I'm still friends with this guy. He was part of the Christian group because they were watching this happen. And this guy says to me, he looks at me and he says, Cliff, you were asking God for signs. He says, man, what more do you want? The Lord is calling you by name. And when he said that to me, I'm thinking about this. And I'm standing outside, and he says this to me. And I'm thinking about this whole thing, and it can't be a coincidence. And it was truly for the first time in my life, I looked up in the sky with a little bit of fear, with a little bit of reverence, because I just knew, what do you do with this? Well, anyway, to make a long story short, these Christians whom I harangued and harassed the whole year, they take me down to the Jordan River. They baptize me. They give me a Bible. And I come back to the United States. And I go back to Gainesville, Florida. Okay, the only problem is I was no more born again than a corpse. I mean, meeting my double was heavy. And I knew there had to be something else out there, okay? At that point, pretty much my atheist, secular, materialistic worldview was starting to come unglued, okay? But nothing really changed in my life. All that mattered was my novel, just to work on my novel. Nothing else mattered. And they gave me the Bible, and I tried to read the Bible, and I tried to read, but I couldn't get past the talking snake, It was like, I wasn't born again. I didn't have any kind of relationship with God. So I'm back in Gainesville, and I'm more open to spiritual things, but all that mattered was my novel. Now, I want to backtrack just a little. When I left Copenhagen, that guy in the occult, I was back in Israel, and I laid down one afternoon to take a nap. And I felt this strange little tingling in my toes. And it rolled up my body, this vibration, till I felt this loud pounding and vibrating in my head. And it was a horrible sensation. And I sat up thinking, what was that? And it started to happen every time I take a nap. This tingling and this rolling up. And I remember this one time I had a feeling like my soul was getting ripped out of my body or something. I didn't know anything. And it kept on happening. And finally, I'm back in Gainesville. And I said to myself, the next time this happens, don't fight it. Because it was not pleasant. But said, go with it. So I'm laying there, this tingling in my toes, this pounding in my head, and I say, go with it, go with it. And the next thing I know is zoosh. I feel myself go flying right out of my body. And I'm going right through the roof. And the next thing I know, I'm floating in the air in this gray, crackly mist outside the second-story apartment of a couple of friends of mine who are into a guru. Now, please, lest I be misunderstood, I am a bona fide, hardcore, Seventh-day Adventist today. I understand perfectly body, mind. I don't have a clue as to body, mind, consciousness. Nobody else has a clue anyway. But I understand now. I know there's no such thing as a separate conscious soul that exists outside the body. Okay? I understand that dogmatically now. But I knew nothing about that then. And after that experience, nothing could have convinced me that that wasn't my soul leaving my body. And after that, I thought, wow, maybe the occult, maybe spiritualism, this is where I'm going to find the truth that I was looking for. Because the experience was real, okay? I had the experience. My interpretation of it, as we'll come to, was wrong. But at the time, I had this experience, and I was convinced that's what it was. And I said, I'm going to study the occult. So I get up the next day, and I'm walking to the library at the University of Florida to start reading about the occult. And I'm a starving writer. Okay? I mean, I was desperate for money because all I wanted to do was write my novel. And I needed a job. And I walked by a health food store. And I thought, oh, hated vegetarians. but I needed a job. So, man, I'll even work for vegetarians if I have to. So I go by this health food store on my way over to get a book on the occult. And the store was closed, and I knock on the door, and this guy comes out. And we start talking. And the moment I tell him what I'm into, he goes, "What?" And he pulls me in the health food store, and he locks the door. And I started telling him about the occult experiences, and he starts warning me about the devil and the satanic deceptions. Well, come on. Telling me at that stage of my life about Satan. He might as well told me that Santa wasn't going to come down the chimney and give me a present on Christmas than to talk to me about Satan. But he says, "Here, read this book." And I'm a writer, so I'm a reader. So he hands me a book. And I take the book, and I go over to remember, I'm on my way to the library to get my first book on the occult to start studying it. So I go over to the library. I don't know how I found it, but I got a book on the occult. And I wasn't in school, so I couldn't check it out. So I sat there in the library with this occult book, and I read the first chapter. And you know, for 40 years, some years, I've been telling them the story. I've never told what the technique was, but I don't think I should hide it anymore. The first thing they said to do in the first chapter was stare at a point in the back of your head. No idea what it means. So I'm sitting there, staring at this point in the back of my head. Okay. And then I get up to put the book back on the shelf. And now the point is, I'm walking through the library, and literally now, in one hand, I've got this book on the occult. For the first time in my life, I've got this book. And literally, in my other hand, for the first time in my life, I got the book that the guy handed me in the health food store. Cult book in one hand, great controversy in the other. I was clueless. I had not a clue, totally oblivious to what was going on. And I read the first couple chapters of Great Controversy. I was getting into it. I hadn't gotten to the occult stuff yet. Well, anyway, about 2 nights later, or a night or two later, I don't remember, it's the fall of 1979. 23 years old. I'm walking back to my apartment in Gainesville, Florida. Put 2.5 years of my life in the novel. Probably had another 2.5 to go. The book was going better than it had gone since I started. Nothing mattered to me but my novel. It dominated my life. Had you asked me at that time, did I believe in God? Did I believe in Jesus? Well, you know, I'd been baptized. And then between meeting my double and the occult stuff, I knew there was more out there. Okay, so I said, you know, I didn't hate Christianity or Jesus anymore. It just didn't really mean anything to me. All that mattered was my book. And I come back to my room, and I sit down in front of my typewriter, and it's important to remember this because I've told this story. You know, kids, and they thought, what's the big deal? Didn't you have everything stored in the cloud? Okay. I had this is 1979, I had a manual typewriter. And I come back to my room, the sun is setting. It's late summer, early fall, 1979. Sit in front of a manual typewriter. And you know, I've been telling this story for decades. And for some reason, only in the past few years did I bring in this other point that I realize now was pivotal to everything. But I sat down, and before I wrote, before I typed, I don't know why I did it, and I didn't know who I was doing it to, but I just closed my eyes and uttered a prayer. And somehow or another, in the great controversy, in what an Adventist scholar at seminary calls the rules of engagement, that prayer, Satan had me. I mean, he had me. I was having a cult experience. Oh, I actually even, and this totally freaks me out, I started writing. I started weaving the occult experience into my novel. In other words, folks, I started writing about the occult. If you see where I'm going with that. Satan had me. But all I know is I uttered this prayer, and that's all the Lord needed. And in that moment, I uttered that prayer, and boom, the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ came to me in the room. I knew instantly who he was. There was never a doubt. And his exact words to me were, Cliff, you have been playing with me long enough. If, I can't tell you how important that if is. It was all my choice. If you want me tonight, burn your novel. It was as simple as that. He showed me in that instant that that novel was my God. I mean, it was I never knew anything about the Bible, but at that instant it was as clear. I saw the issues as black and white as it could be. That was my God. And I said, oh Lord, please I'll write the book all to your glory. If you want me tonight, burn the novel. Please let me finish it. If you want me tonight, burn the novel. God, please, can't we talk about this another time? If you want me, burn the novel. Well, folks, I could have slit my throat easier than I could have burned the novel. I couldn't do it. I had nothing. That was all I had. And I remember at one point I just jumped up, I burst into tears, and I ran out of the room. And I'm walking through the streets of Gainesville. And it's at night. And these are the exact streets I walked through when 2-3 years earlier, I remember thinking I wanted truth no matter the cost. Whew. And now I'm confronted with the cost. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And I'm just walking through the streets and I'm going through all this. And then finally, at some point I stop. And why I remember these details, I don't know. Why I keep telling them, I don't know. But it's just part of the story. I stopped underneath this street lamp. And I can still remember the bugs flying around the lamp and casting their shadows on the ground. And at that point right there, I said, okay, God, I want you and I want truth more than I want this book. But if you want it burned, you have to burn it for me. But the moment I made that choice, the moment I made that surrender, boom, it was over. You know, God might not force, but I did sort of feel this grip around my neck. And the moment I made that choice, it was amazing. It lifted off of me. And at that moment I knew exactly what I was going to do. I mean, I knew nothing. If you had said to me at that moment that I was a sinner, I wouldn't have had the slightest concept of what you were talking about. That's how little I knew of any theology, Adventism, anything. But knowing nothing about anything, I walked back to my room. There's my manuscript. 2.5 years of my life. And when you're 23, 2.5 years, I had this hot plate my mother had given me, hopes I'd cook something. Little did she know. And I picked up this manuscript, knowing nothing. I mean, I knew, as I said, I didn't know I was a sinner. I knew nothing. I picked up that manuscript, put it on the hot plate, turned the knob, and burned the novel. And that was the night I became a born-again believer in Jesus. Burned that novel, and that was it. I burned the novel, and boom. After that, I went back to the health food store, studied with them, and became a born-again believer. And it was through the Adventists I studied. And a couple points. I was standing in front of the health food store in Gainesville. The Adventists are studying with me. And I see a car, and I think, do I want to let the car pass or do I wait? So, I'm not one to overexert myself unnecessarily. So I just stop, and the car drives by. And who do you think's in the car? Clifford Goldstein. And the look on his face seeing me. And we talked, and I saw him one other time after that, and I've lost contact with him. And those occult experiences, I'm convinced from that interaction with that guy in Copenhagen, Satan got a hook in me. You ever hear these stories about these near-death experiences? They die and they float outside the exact phenomena I had. They meet their dead relatives. I wasn't anywhere near dead. I'm convinced Satan got in my head and gave me this deception. But man, it was powerful. And it had me snookered. But the moment I gave my heart to the Lord that night, those experiences never came back. You know, raised as I was secular, the idea of the devil, very hard. But you know, folks, after that, can't prove it. Logically, chemically, whatever. I know about the reality. Okay? I know, but praise the Lord, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And those occult experiences never came back. And that preacher I used to harangue, he came back, and I got out right in the center of the circle with him. And he probably thought, here we go again. Only this time now I witnessed with him to many of the students in the crowd who remembered me as Heckle. They remembered me. All right, I'm going to wrap this up now, and I want to end on one final point. Like when I burned that novel that night, I mean, writing is the only thing I have any aptitude for. It's the only thing I put any effort in. I mean, I'm a total schlep in every other aspect of my life. It's the only thing, it was the only thing I knew how to do, only thing I cared about doing. And when I burned that novel that night, I died to it. And I realized I might not ever write again. And if that's what it took, I died. That was it. And for about 2 years, I was just a total reorientation of my whole life. You know, I mean, my worldview from the most foundational principles. It was really kind of humbling going your first 23 years and realizing that almost every foundational thing you believed was wrong. Okay? It was all, you know, it was almost your whole life you're told the world was flat and then discovering it's round. Your whole life you're told 2 + 2 = 5, only discovering it was 4. That's how fundamental my whole worldview changed. But for about 2 years, just was learning, didn't do any writing. Then one day, about 2.5 years later, the door opened for me to write an article. And you know what it was on? No, you wouldn't know, would you? It was on the health benefits of vegetarianism. Yeah. But the point is, I burned that novel that night. I died to it. In the Lord's time, He opened the door for me to write again. And I haven't stopped writing since. And can you see the point? The Lord gave it back to me. And, you know, I like to end this. I usually end this with an appeal because I realize, because, you know, you could be a lifelong Adventist. You could be, but you could have kind of your own novel in your life. I have to always make sure I don't pick up another one. And I think at this stage, that's, well, you know, I guess take heed lest he that thinketh he standeth falleth. But if there's anything in your life that's between you and the Lord that you're holding on to, you know, I shudder. That night, people, 2 things in that room that night where I can't explain. I mean, I can't try to convince anybody. The reality of my free choice. I mean, it's scary to me to think my eternal destiny hung on my free choice. I could have gone the other way, so it was so close. I just shudder. How close. And the second thing was, too, I sensed that night that if I don't do it now, I'll never have a chance again. And I look back now, because at the time didn't know, Satan had me in the occult. I would have written. The bottom line is, looking back now, what I do for Jesus, I could have been doing for the other guy. See my point? And if he would have had me in that so hard. So for that night, don't ask me how I knew. I mean, I knew it was my choice, but I had this sense, because God's presence was so real, that I knew if I walk away from this now, you know, for some reason I know I'm never going to get the opportunity again. But the Lord in His time gave it back to me. And so, can I close with prayer? Okay. And I like this close. And I don't know any of you. I don't know your hearts. I don't know your background. I know, you know. But I want to just close and pray for us all. That maybe if there's something in our lives that we're holding on to, just something that God is not going to force you to do it. Free will is so sacred. Jesus, in eternity past, knew He'd have to go to the cross because He gave us free will. And rather than deny us free will, So look, I want them to be able to love me. In order for them to love, they have to have free will. I can't force love. And I know what they're going to do, but I will go to the cross rather than deny them the privilege to love and to know love and to be able to love. So using the free will that cost God so much, he's not going to force you. You have to ultimately make that choice. And oof, all I know is I shudder to think where I would have been had I not made that choice. Anyway, let's pray. Let's close our eyes. Let's pray. Father, again, I just thank you for the way you worked in my life. It was many years ago. When I retell this story, I just can remember one small person, and you, the creator of the cosmos, you arrange things in such a remarkable way. You are very close, Lord. Paul says you are not far from any of us. And Lord, I pray for all of us here, for myself and for anyone here. Lord, you know their hearts, you know their struggles, you know their pains, you know their fears, you know the great controversy that rages in each heart as it rages in the cosmos. And Lord, I pray that if there's anyone here holding on to anything analogous to the book, similar to the book, I pray that your Spirit will touch them. You'll bring conviction to them the way you brought conviction to me. Doesn't have to all be so dramatic and all that, but at the same time, Lord, you can touch them. And if there's somebody here clinging to something, I pray that you'll bring the conviction. And Lord, that they, using the gift of free choice, they will choose you, an eternity with you over the fleeting things of the world. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.